What happened?
Can anyone hear anything?
No, no, we can't. Rabbi is muted. I was just gonna send him a something in chat.
Thanks.
I didn't mute it from the, there we go. Thank you, everybody. Sorry. We were muted in the room, but thank you for, oh, and video too. We got to start our video. So thank you, Mike. Oh, yeah, we're not on yet. Yeah. So we're on audio. You can hear us now. Sorry about that, but we're not on video. We'll be on in 1 second. So this is our last class before Passover. And I thought about I was thinking about doing Passover texts from the Talmud. And then I said, well, last week we looked at the construction of the temple. And I thought if we didn't do it today, we'd kind of be missing the opportunity to reflect on the destruction of the temple just after we read about the construction of the temple during Herod's time. Because remember, Herod completely destroyed the temple and then rebuilt another thing. I mean, he didn't destroy it, he took it down and then rebuilt it. But it was a new temple. I mean, when people went into that temple, we don't call it the third temple. Third temple has not been built, or some people say not been built yet. But we still called it the second temple because it was there and then it was improved on. So there was probably, again, part of it that they really didn't take down and, kind of did what we do in California, which is leave a wall and then build around it. So it's not a totally new construction, right? So they probably did the same thing to some extent with the temple. I mean, we have the version of the Talmud's discussion about the construction that we read last week, and we also have the Talmud's in addition to the Talmud's description, we have Josephus's description, some Roman descriptions of it. But today we're reading about the destruction, and one of the reasons why it's kind of important to do that in back-to-back weeks is because in reality, that second temple or second temple 2.0, the Herod temple, only stood for about 50 years. From the time that it was finished to the time that it was destroyed in 70, it only stood for 50 years, around 60 years. So it wasn't there for very long. What? The Western Wall is still there. Yeah, thousands of years later, the Western Wall, which is a retaining wall, not the wall of the temple, but the wall of the mount of the temple, that's still there. And there's other pieces of the second temple that we can see, the stairs and some of the places on the southern, we call the southern steps. Those are still there from that period. And the arch, we call Wilson's Arch. Those are still there. Robinson Arch, those things are there. But from the first temple period, but nothing from what we can say definitively was in the first temple. But we have stuff from that period that we've uncovered, first temple period. But the second temple stuff that we found and we're still finding, we're finding in archaeological digs right now. The second temple stuff was destroyed by the Romans. And today we're also going to read that it wasn't just destroyed by the Romans, it was destroyed by the Jews. The Jews themselves destroyed it. Josephus tells us that, and the Talmud tells us that. So we tell the story that we destroyed it too. You'll see why we destroyed it, or at least the Talmud's version of why. I think it's probably accurate. Kind of. The Josephus story, Mike's asking, is the same as Josephus. It's similar enough that if you read between the lines, they're in agreement on this. Uh, Essentially, yeah, you'll see why. It'll be right there. You don't have to guess. It's not implied. It says why the Jews destroyed part of Jerusalem themselves. So yeah, it was important to look at this. Now, it's not that relevant to Passover because of all the holidays that are mentioned that we celebrate with a sacrifice. The Passover sacrifice is interesting because it really wasn't a temple sacrifice. It was a family sacrifice. The family ate the lamb. The family took part in it. Yes, but by the Roman period, it wasn't. By the Roman period, this isn't the New Year. It is really the harvest festival and the historic festival of leaving Egypt. And by the time of Jesus, by the time of the Second Temple, by the time the temple is destroyed, there is a temple with sacrifices that are going on every day, many times a day, that people are going, but they're still doing Passover in their homes. So Passover is kind of, if you think about it, was a remnant from the ancient times of the Jews when we had sacrifices in our backyards, when people didn't just sacrifice in Jerusalem, because every household took a lamb and essentially didn't sacrifice it, right? They didn't burn it on the altar, but they ate it and then they burnt what was left over. And of course, they took a little blood and put it on their doorposts. So all of those things are kind of sacrificial rituals, obviously, and they continued even when the temple was standing. And of course, to some extent, it still happens today. But Passover in that way is maybe like the least temple dependent ritual. So Passover is not really what we're reading about here, other than, it, when the temple was destroyed, holidays like Passover became vitally important because it preserved Judaism. Mike, yeah. Oh, no, they were around. They were around. Were they as developed, the laws of like kosher for Passover, as they are today? No, because they didn't have as many options. Yeah. Well, so Mike is asking if the people were sacrificing the lambs correctly. Were they killing them in the proper manner? Yeah, they would have been. And what's interesting, of course, is that whether it's for Passover or whether it's for any average day when they're slaughtering an animal, there were people who probably did it themselves. And there were other people who were worried about not doing it in a kosher way, and they would go to a slaughterer who would do it for them. And they might have just felt more comfortable having a slaughterer do it anyways, because my guess is there were people who didn't like doing it. I think there were a lot of people, probably through history, who said, you know what, I'll take it down to the slaughterer. He knows how to do it. He does it better than I do. He does it every day. And they paid the guy a few coins and he did it. Maybe he kept a little piece for himself, whatever the trade-off was with the barter arrangement with the slaughterer. But yeah, I mean, we know that there was people who did slaughtering for people, and those people's last name today are Shochet. Hey, there's people who their name is Rabbi Shochet down at, thank God he's still alive. Rabbi Shochet was the rabbi at Shomrei Torah for a long time in the valley. His ancestors were Shochet. The last name Schechter. A shechter is a slaughter. Shechtman, slaughter. Somebody was a slaughter. So anything with shecht in it, or shecht, or shochet, is a slaughter. So yeah, it was an important job. So yeah, but what we're reading about today are people that are being slaughtered, unfortunately. So we're going to read about the destruction of the temple from the point of view of the Jews. Who are our ancestors, the rabbis. And as we looked last week, we read about King Herod, that at least according to the Talmud, King Herod, and it's also in Josephus, so it's, again, probably based on real stories of what really happened, the unembellished story, was that There was a time when Herod killed lots of rabbis, and then he stopped, either because they proved to him, as the Talmud says, that they're not against him, or he turned his attention elsewhere and was more worried about other people and said, this isn't, what I need to worry about. I need to worry about something else. So we don't know for sure why he stopped killing the rabbis, but he did at some point. And again, it was an up and down situation with the rabbis. But we're going to see today that the rabbis have a problem not just with the Romans, who we read about the martyrdom and the killing of people like Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Hanina and all those other rabbis that were murdered by the Romans. They worried about Herod, who was kind of Jewish, we looked at. I mean, partly Jewish, thought of himself as Jewish. And now we're going to read about plain old Jews, everyday Jews, well, not everyday Jews, but Jews with swords that killed rabbis too. And they were called the Sicarii. And the Sicarii right here were known as Sicarii by us, and seems that way by the Romans. Josephus calls them the Zealots, but he also calls them Sicarii too. But they're referred to as the Zealots. And Josephus refers to them as the fourth party in Jerusalem at the time. There were the Sadducees, who were the priests, the Kohanim, the Pharisees, who are the rabbis, the sages. There are the Essenes, which we know of a little bit more today because they're probably the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're concerned with ritual purity, and they're definitely not Pharisees, but they're interpreting the Bible, but they're also separating themselves much more than any of the groups. And then the fourth group, according to Josephus, are the Sicarii or the Zealots. And these are people that are primarily motivated by politics. They want to get the Romans out more than anything, and above anything, and through anything, including killing other Jews. They are not above killing other Jews. As we read about, we know that they would, according to the Talmud, they were killing people and threatening to kill them unless they gave them their land. For example, this page, what we're going to actually read about, the destruction of the temple, starts with a description of the Sicarii. It says right here, if one purchased land from Sicarii, right, who extorted, and by the way, the Sicario are known today as Mexican drug lords are called Sicario. There was actually 2 movies called Sicario, which they're the enforcers and killers for the Mexican gangs in Mexico. But they're scary first here, and they're mentioned here because they would take property from people. They would then sell. They would extort them, and then they would. This text of the Talmud basically says if you bought property from one of them, it's not considered a legitimate deed because they stole it. So you don't buy things from the Sicarii because they stole it. Okay? So we're not going to read that section because it's not really about the temple, but it's interesting because it sets us up with important information about the Sicarii, which is the rabbis are afraid of them. They don't like them. They don't trust them. And they know that they're causing problems and that they killed other Jews, right? It says they would kill Jews. And we're going to see if they're extorting them, that means that people believe that they could kill them. It only works, the extortion only works if people are afraid of them. So now we're going to get to the actual text about, because those were exactly the people at Masada. Mike, yeah, exactly. So yeah, thank you for reminding us that those are the people that were actually at Masada. They were the last holdouts. They continued to fight. So now we're going to actually talk about the destruction. And the Talmud talks about it here in this section on Gittin, which is not about the temple. It's not about history. I mean, no tractate of the Talmud is really about history. It's not even about, it has nothing to do with the Kohanim. It has nothing to do with holidays. Gittin, the tractate, is about get. It's about divorces. It's about contracts of marriage which are then dissolved by a get. So a ketubah is rendered annulled by the get. And this is a tractate about gitin, about that, divorce essentially. So this has nothing to do with it other than the conversation started, actually, the part I showed you about was about bill of sales and deeds. And if that was part of like a contract, whether that was legitimate, if it involved property that was owned or had been taken by the Sakari. That's how we got into this discussion. And so we're skipping over that discussion a little bit because it's not really about this, which is the Talmud's version of what happened when Jerusalem fell. And this is what it says happens. So it says, and again, I want to make it really clear. This is not history, okay? This is not what Josephus wrote about. This is not what the Romans wrote about. And it does not follow a linear, or it is not based on factual evidence. I don't know what else to say other than the people who wrote this most likely were writing it 200 years later. They were not concerned with writing about an accurate history. They were writing it from Babylonia. This part of the Talmud was written in Babylonia. And they were not familiar necessarily with the historical Caesars as we know them, know a lot about them from Roman history and from Josephus and other histories from other peoples who wrote about them. They did not live under Roman authority, the Babylonian communities. They lived under Persian, Zoroastrian leaders who were not pagan, Greco-Roman pagans. They were Zoroastrians. They were not necessarily familiar with Roman history. It was not their culture. It was not their history. And so they didn't have to be historically accurate. People didn't check them for their facts. And I say that because, again, this is the stories you're about to read are not based on what happened to some extent. But they're very interesting and they're very important. And there are kernels of truth to this, or facts. They're all true in the sense that they're all meaningful and they're all have things to teach us. But as far as verifiable facts, there are a couple of things that are as verifiable as they can be because they're in every one of the sources. They can be verified by archaeological evidence, and so it's not fantasy. This part that begins with is a little fantasy. So what it says, the Talmud says, and again, the part in bold is the actual text from the Talmud. The rest is the commentary, the explanation. The Roman authorities sent Nero, Caesar, against the Jews. Now, Nero, the Emperor Nero, who you know about mostly from the movies and from, if you've read books about the Romans, he is considered to be a horrible Roman emperor, a horrible Caesar. He's most known for what? For fiddling while Rome burned, right? Playing a violin or a stringed instrument, a lyre, while the city burned. Okay? That also really isn't factual, but he was not well loved by the Roman people. They rebelled against him, and he did not have a good end. However, he also didn't attack Jerusalem. This says that he did. Maybe, again, some of his generals were part of it, yes. There were times during his reign where things were not good for the Jews in Israel, okay? But this story, he didn't come to attack Jerusalem. Well, look at what it says happens. When he came to Jerusalem, he wished to test his fate. He shot an arrow to the east, and the arrow came and fell in Jerusalem. He then shot another arrow to the west. It also fell in Jerusalem. He shot an arrow in all four directions of the heavens, and each time the arrow fell in Jerusalem. Nero then conducted another test. He said to a child, "Tell me a verse that you learned today." He said to him as follows, "And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel." That's a line from Ezekiel. Nero said, "The Holy One, blessed be he, wishes to destroy his temple, and he wishes to wipe his hands of that with that man." Meaning, oh, Ezekiel's talking about the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, but the line says Edom. Edom are the Romans. The modern equivalent of Edom, according to Midrash, are the Romans. And so the Romans are going to destroy the temple, but the person who does it's going to be cursed. I don't want to be that guy. Right? So he says, if I continue on this mission, I will be punished for having served as God's agent. So even though, again, Nebuchadnezzar is God's agent to destroy the first temple, we're going to see the emperor who destroys the second temple is God's agent. He doesn't want to be God's agent because as much as you're doing God's work, you're going to be punished for doing God's work. So that's the interesting fate. Your fate is doing God's work, but being punished for it. You don't want that. So it says he fled and became a convert, and ultimately Rabbi Meir descended from him. Yes, that same Meir, Rabbi Meir, who's Rabbi Hanina's son-in-law, the one who's married to his daughter, Beruria. That same guy. So about 100 years later, or 75 years later, Rabbi Meir is born. Now, Rabbi Meir may have had Roman ancestry. Nero might have had family that converted to Judaism. There is no evidence that Nero became a Jew or that he had grandchildren that were rabbis. There's no version of Roman history that tells us that. And there's no version of the history that Nero survived, because he doesn't survive. He has a very brutal end. So this story about a Roman, or again, whether Nero, became, didn't want to have anything to do with the destruction. According to tradition, Nero set fire to Rome and then blamed it on the Christians. And this happens about 2 years before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. So, and it says right here, yeah, this is some of the things that Nero did, which I don't need to go into too much, but he's not considered, again, a very popular Roman emperor. And what it says about his end is that Rome turns on him. He learned that the Senate had declared him a public enemy. He prepared himself for suicide, pacing up and down, muttering in Latin, qualis artifex pareo. Losing his nerve, he begged one of his companions to set an example by killing himself first. At last, the sound of approaching horsemen drove Nero to face the end. However, he could still not bring himself to take his life, but instead forced his private secretary, Epaphroditus, to perform the task. Right? So that is the way the guy died. So when he dies, the Julian Claudian dynasty ended. That's the dynasty started by Julius Caesar, continued on by Augustus, carried on by Claudius and Tiberius and Caligula and all those horrible kings that, emperors that came after Caesar's. And then after he died, chaos would ensue in the year of the four emperors. And so what we do know is that after Nero died, there was chaos in Rome. And that's one of the reasons why the Jews revolted, because they knew that there was chaos going on back in Rome. So it wasn't like a coincidence. It wasn't like the Jews just decided in that period of time to revolt. They knew there was chaos. They knew there was no Caesar on the throne. And they had what was called the Year of the Four Emperors, where there were four generals that all sought to become emperor by going to war against the other one and trying to take power. It was the end of a dynasty and the beginning of a new dynasty. And that's where we read about this guy. The Roman authorities then sent Vespasian Caesar against the Jews. So this, the way the Talmud says it, is that Nero was first going to destroy, and then this happens. look, that's not what happens. But from the Jewish standpoint, maybe it looked like that's kind of what's happening. But what really happened is the Jews who started the revolt looked at the chaos that was going on and then started this stuff. And some of it did start during Nero's time because they knew that Nero was weak. But Vespasian is the one who comes out. And one of the reasons he comes out, friends, is because he destroys Jerusalem. And he has this tremendous victory over the Judeans, which he can then come back to Rome and declare himself the emperor. He builds a wonderful arch. We'll get to it in a second. And he builds a wonderful stadium in the center of Rome to commemorate his victory, which he'll use Jewish slaves to build. And that's called the Colosseum. Let's see how he did it. You're going to see it now. So this is the story, at least from our standpoint, but in the most historical version, the Josephus version, there's enough similarities here that you can see what's going on here, at least from our standpoint, the Jewish standpoint. The Roman authorities then sent Vespasian Caesar against the Jews. He came and laid siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. Well, that's pretty close. It took that long. There were in that time in Jerusalem 3 wealthy people, Nakdimon ben Gurion, ben Kalba Savua, and ben Tzitzit HaKesat. We'll get to those 3 guys. One of them you've heard of. The Gemara explains the names. Nakdimon ben Gurion was called by this name because the sun shined Nakad on his behalf, as it is related elsewhere, that the sun once continued to shine in order to prevent him from suffering a substantial loss. That's how powerful he was. Ben Kalba Savua was called this because anyone who entered his house when he was hungry as a dog, a kelev, will left satisfied. So the name Kalba Savua in Aramaic means a satiated dog. Means the dog satisfied. He's full. By the way, Ben Kalba Savua is Rabbi Akiva's father-in-law. That's the same guy who disowns his daughter Rachel because she married Akiva in the first place. That's how wealthy he was at one point. So after the destruction of Jerusalem, he's not as wealthy, but he's still wealthy, and he still was really wealthy. Third guy, though, is Ben Tzitzit HaKesat. He was referred to by this name because his ritual fringes, his tzitzit, dragged along on blankets, keset, meaning that he would not walk in the street with his feet touching the ground, but rather they would place blankets beneath him. So he could literally walk on the ground. His tzitzit could hang down and never touch the ground because they put blankets underneath him when he walked. I don't know. It's his nickname. Did it really happen? I don't know. But his name was Tzitzit Kasat, and that's how they put it together, the blankets and the tzitzit. There are those who say that his seat, his kiseh, was found among the nobles of Rome, meaning that he would sit among them. So the other possibility is the kiseh is actually kiseh, a throne that he had with Romans. He was so wealthy, he hung out with the Romans. Now, these 3 people offered their assistance. To who? During the siege, taking care of people. One of them said to the leaders of the city, I will feed the residents with wheat and barley. And one of them said to the leaders of the city, I will provide the residents with wine, salt, and oil. And one of them said to the leaders of the city, I will supply the residents with wood. The Gemara comments, and the sages gave special praise to he who gave the wood, since this was an especially expensive gift. Now, maybe because, again, the wood doesn't seem as necessary as the other stuff, but of course it is, because if you don't have wood, you can't have any cooking, you can't have any hot water, any of the things that you need. As Rav Chisda would give all the keys, aklide, to his servant, except for the key to his shed for storing wood, which he deemed the most important of them all. And Rav Chisda said, 1 storehouse of wheat requires 60 storehouses of wood for cooking and baking fuel. These 3 wealthy men had been, between them, enough commodities to sustain the besieged for 21 years. So, according to the Talmud, they held out for 3 years. That's what Josephus says. That's what the Romans say. It's roughly 3 years. The Talmud says, though, that the Jews had enough supplies to last for 21 years under siege. Is it meant to be literal? I don't know. But it's 7 times what they really ended up being under siege for. Okay. Well, interestingly, you probably figure out what's going to happen here. There were certain zealots among the people of Jerusalem. The sages said to them, "Let us go out and make peace with the Romans." This is the critical part right here. The rabbi said, we need to make peace with the Romans. But the zealots did not allow them to do this. The zealots said to the sages, "Let us go out and engage in battle with the Romans." But the sages said to them, "You will not be successful." Flat out said, you're going to lose. Don't fight them, and definitely don't go outside and fight them. If you're going to fight them, it would be better for you to wait until the siege is broken. In order to force the residents of the city to engage in battle, the zealots rose and burned down those storehouses of wheat and barley. And there was a general famine. So they burned part of Jerusalem themselves. They burned the storehouses to force the people to fight. Jews burned the storehouses, according to this text. These are not good people. They killed other Jews who didn't want to fight. We're going to see that right now. But they're literally putting everyone's life at risk by doing this. So this tells us flat out the same thing that Josephus said, which is that the Jews set fire to part of Jerusalem themselves. And Josephus goes even further to say that the Jews did it on the Temple Mount on Tisha B'Av to burn the temple on the same day as it was by the Babylonians. That they made it that day. Now, maybe it would have been close to that day anyways. They were under siege, whatever, but they forced it to be fated that way. So look what we're going to do on this day. So it would be like if we started another war on December 7th, or we did something on September 11th to further cement in the history of those dates. But this is what the zealots did. They literally put their own people's lives at risk. We'll force them to fight. This next part, we'll read it, but it's sad. And when we get to this, we'll read it right now. The meaning of this is to tell you what happens during war in the ancient world. And there's versions of it even in more modern times. Whether this story and whether any of these stories actually happen the way that they say, I think that there's some truth to this part of the story, even though it's like tangential. Look at this story. With regard to this famine, it is related that Marta Batos was one of the wealthy women of Jerusalem. Her name was Marta. She sent out her agent and said to him, "Go bring me fine flour." By the time he went, the fine flour was already sold. He came and said to her, "There is no fine flour, but there is ordinary flour." She said to him, "Go then bring me the ordinary flour." By the time he went, the ordinary flour was also gone. He came to her and said, "There is no ordinary flour, but there is coarse flour." She said to him, "Go and bring me coarse flour." But by the time he went, it was already sold. He came to her and said, "There's no coarse flour, but there's barley flour." She said to him, "Go and bring me barley flour." But once again, by the time he went, the barley flour was also sold. You understand what's happening here, right? So you can also see, by the way, we talked about it actually yesterday, about flour and about wheat and barley. You can see what the value was. There were different levels of flour, right? Right? There's fine flour, there's coarse flour, there's ordinary flour. There's ordinary flour, there's coarse flour. There's fine flour, there's ordinary flour, there's coarse flour. There's fine flour, there's ordinary flour, there's coarse flour. There's fine flour, there's ordinary flour, there's fine flour, there's ordinary flour, there's coarse flour. Right? There's ordinary flour, and then coarse flour, and then barley. But it sounds like what happened during COVID, you know? You go out to the store, you'd say, oh, they don't have the toilet paper I want. You come home. Oh, now they don't have any toilet paper, right? So this is what happens during war, even more so. So this woman's got no food, right? She had just removed her shoes, but she said, I'll go out myself and see if I can find something to eat. She stepped on some dung, which stuck to her foot, and overcome by disgust, she died. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy, right? It's like she died of a broken heart. But this was a woman who was so wealthy that she never even went out and did the shopping herself anyways. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai read concerning her a verse found in the section of the Torah listing the curses that will befall Israel from Kitavo, from the Torah, right, from Deuteronomy. The tender and delicate woman among you who would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground. Wow. That's the line, right? That's exactly what the Torah said was going to happen to the first temple. People were going to be, or the, destruction would happen to Israel. There are those who say she did not step in the dung, but rather she ate a fig of Rabbi Tzadok and became disgusted and died. What are these figs? Rabbi Tzadok observed fast for 40 years, praying that Jerusalem would not be destroyed. He became so emaciated from fasting that when he would eat something, it was visible from the outside of his body. And he would eat after a fast, they would bring him figs, and he would suck out the liquids and cast the rest away. It was one such fig that Martha Baitos found, and that caused her death. Wow. All these stories there's a kernel of truth to them. And look at this one. It is further related that as she was dying, she took out all of her gold and silver and threw it in the marketplace. And she said, why do I need this? And as it is written again in the Torah, they shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be as an impure thing. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowels. That line from Ezekiel. What good is money if you can't buy food with it? Can't even buy food. And that is a truth of war that also happens, because it's not just death by battle, by combat. It's not just destruction, it's also starvation. So much so that, again, they might have had gold and silver, but they couldn't have food. So now they don't have food, people are really panicked because they're being surrounded by the strongest army in the world. And at this point, at the point that they were going to be destroyed, the Temple Mount area, Jerusalem's center, where the temple was, is now surrounded by the Romans. And specifically now by Vespasian. Okay? Any questions so far? Because this is the moment of the destruction, and this is the moment of how Jewish history changes forever. No questions? All right. Then let's read this story. Um, Abba Sikara, which, by the way, the name Abba Sikara means the father, the leader of the Sikari. It's a title. It's not his name. Abba means father. Right? That's where the word Abbey comes from, or abbot, the monk. The word Abba means father and means leader. Abba Sikara was the leader of the Zealots. They were called Biryoni also in Jerusalem. And he was the son of the sister of Rabbi Yochanan, which is another way of saying he was his nephew, but we don't have a word for that in Hebrew or Aramaic. It means he was his nephew. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the leading rabbi of the time in Jerusalem. His nephew is the head of the Sicarii, which tells us that just because you're a Pharisee doesn't mean that you don't have a nephew or a brother who's a Sicarii or a Sadducee. There's families that are split into these different parties. You could be born in one and then choose to kind of, your dad could have been a Pharisee and then you become a zealot, or vice versa. Right? So his nephew is the head of the zealots, right? And Rabbi Yochanan is one of the leading rabbis at the time. This is literally as the city is burning. He sends him a message, come meet me in secret. He came, and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation? How much longer is this going to continue? Abba Sikara said to him, what can I do? For if I say something to them, they will kill me. So the head of the Sicarii says, I can't call off the Sicarii. They'll kill me. So whether or not he wanted this war to continue, it doesn't matter. He has no choice. His own troops will kill him if he steps down. He tries to negotiate a, peace if he wants to back out. Can't. By the way, this is how you know that these people were bad people. This is how you know the Sicarii were not good people, not just from the rabbinic side, right? I mean, again, this is the rabbis telling the story, but there seems to be a real sense here that the Sicarii could turn on each other. Now, it's tough because, there are people, and they're the last people who held out at Masada. But we know what they're capable of because they killed each other on Masada. They burned their food at Masada because the Romans were about to come in and they wanted to show the Romans. I mean, they didn't burn the food until, the food was there. They burned themselves, they burned what was there, but they showed the Romans that they could have held out. So we know these people they're suicidal. And that's one of the reasons the rabbis are so fed up with them. Because there's not going to be any people left. Our people are all going to die. I want to use another modern example, but this is why, you can't find any Palestinians that are willing to stand up and say, how much longer are you going to have us be killed for? I hate to use that political example from the modern world as we're seeing it right now, but every time somebody from Hamas or a Palestinian in Gaza tries to say stop it, they kill them. Right? Anybody who protests against Hamas is risking their own lives in Gaza. Unfortunately, this is what happens. It happens. There's a truth to this, is what I'm telling you. There's an element of sad truth to this. So Yochanan ben Zakkai, what was he going to do? His own nephew can't save anybody, can't save himself. So Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, show me a method so that I will be able to leave the city. And it is possible that through this there will be some small salvation. Maybe some of us can be saved. Abba Sakara said to him, this is what you should do. Pretend to be sick and have everyone come and ask about your welfare so that word will spread about your ailing condition. Afterward, bring something putrid and place it near you so that people will say that you have died and are decomposing. Then have your students enter to bring you to burial, and let no one else come in so that the zealots not notice that you are still light, as the zealots know what a living person is lighter than a dead person. Interesting, right? You're going to have to pretend to be dead. You're going to get in a coffin. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai did this. Rabbi Eliezer entered from one side and Rabbi Yoshua from the other side to take him out. When they arrived at the entrance of the city on the inside, the guards who were of the faction of the Zealots, right? The Zealots were guarding, wanted to pierce him with their swords in order to ascertain that he was actually dead, as this was the common practice, right? They know these games. They don't want anyone to escape. So they like, will pierce him, make sure he's dead. If he's dead, it's not going to do anything to him, right? Abba Sakara said to them, the Romans say that they will even pierce their teacher. So Sakara steps in to save his uncle's life and says, don't do it to him. He's one of the leaders. And if the Romans see that he's been stabbed, right, if there's holes in the coffin, they're going to say they're even spearing their own leaders. The guards then wanted to at least push him to see whether he was still alive, in which case he would cry out on account of the pushing. Rabbi, right, Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's in there. Abba Sakara said to them, they will say that you push your teacher, right? It's also not a good look. The guards then opened the gate and he was taken out. So you can see, like, this is like a real scary moment. What are they going to do to prove that there's a dead guy in the coffin? And there isn't. There's a live guy, and he's Yochanan ben Zakkai. So it's a very scary moment. Maybe it's embellished. I don't know. But there's probably some truth to this story. There's probably like a kernel of him being smuggled out. Maybe it wasn't quite as dramatic as, sometimes for the movies, right? They ramp up the tension a little bit. They'll mix two things together that happen separately. I don't know. But it's still a very scary moment. Is he going to be able to get out? Well, he gets out. So he comes onto the other side, to the Roman side, the siege. When Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai reached there, the Roman camp, he said, greetings to you, the king. Greetings to you, the king. So he sees Vespasian, who at that point is still a general, and he says to him, greetings, king. Greetings, king. And Vespasian said to him, you are liable for two death penalties. One, because I'm not king, and you call me king. And furthermore, if I am a king, why didn't you come and tell me now? Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, as for what you said about yourself, I'm not a king. In truth, you are a king. Because in the future, you got to be king. Because if you're not a king, Jerusalem will not be handed over into your hand, as it is written in the Bible, right? Isaiah said, and the Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one, and the mighty one means a king. As it is written also in the book of Jeremiah, and their mighty one shall be of themselves, and their ruler shall proceed from the midst of them, indicating the mighty one and a ruler in Lebanon. These all mean the temple and its destruction, the good mountain in Lebanon. He's finding Torah quotes. What does Vespasian care about Torah quotes? Vespasian doesn't, but we do. He's basically saying he foretells that Vespasian is going to be the emperor. And as for what you said with your second comment, if I am king, why didn't you come to me now? There are zealots among us who did not allow us to do this. I tried, but they wouldn't let me come. The zealots wouldn't let me come. So he says, you are going to be king. Now, of course, Vespasian wants to be king. We know that. I don't know that Yochanan ben Zakkai knew it, but he probably guessed that there was no king, there was no Caesar in Rome at the time, and everyone's jockeying for, or there was, but there is for a month, and then there's another month where another guy's there. it's not very stable, and there's an opportunity for Vespasian to be emperor, and he basically says, "You're the emperor. You're going to be the emperor, and you're an emperor to some extent because otherwise you never would have been able to conquer Jerusalem." So, needless to say, understanding that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was prepared to ask him not to destroy the temple, Vespasian said to him, "If there is a barrel of honey and a snake is wrapped around it," right? So there's a barrel of honey, a snake is wrapped around it. Wouldn't they break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In similar fashion, I'm forced to destroy the city of Jerusalem in order to kill the zealots barricaded within it. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was silent and did not answer. In light of this, Rav Yosef later read the following verse about him, and some say it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. "I am the Lord who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish." It's from Isaiah. As Rabbi Yochanan should have said the following to Vespasian in response: "In such a case, we take tongs, remove the snake, and kill it, and that way we leave the barrel intact. So too you should kill the rebels and leave the city as it is." He didn't say anything. The rabbis have a problem acknowledging that their great hero, Yochanan ben Zakkai, doesn't speak up to save Jerusalem. Now, maybe Yochanan ben Zakkai knew it was not going to help. They have a problem with it because they say, why did he not say anything? If the argument is, and we don't know, by the way, that Vespasian said to Yochanan ben Zakkai, "Look, I have to destroy the city because I have to destroy the zealots." And by the way, that didn't work because I just told you, you know it. The zealots hung out at Masada. 4 years later, there's still zealots fighting. So just because you destroyed Jerusalem didn't mean you did away with the zealots. Okay, you dealt them a pretty fatal blow. You killed a lot of them. You killed a lot of other people in Jerusalem too that don't like the zealots, like this guy. So all the other rabbis who couldn't get out, all the other Pharisees and Sadducees and everybody else who was caught in Jerusalem, they didn't get out. And again, the rabbis have an issue with this because Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't say anything. And again, this is the problem of war. And this is part of the truth of how horrible war is, that there isn't an easy answer for this. In the meantime, as they were talking, a messenger arrived from Rome and said to him, "Rise, for the emperor has died, and the noblemen of Rome plan to appoint you as their leader and make you the next emperor." At that time, Vespasian was only wearing one shoe, and when he tried to put on the other one, it would not go onto his foot. And he tried to remove the other shoe that he was already wearing, and it would not come off. And he said, "What is this? What happened? Oh, my shoes." Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right, said to him, "Be not distressed or troubled, for good tidings have reached you, as it is written, good tidings will make the bone fat, and your feet have grown fatter out of joyous satisfaction." So he says, your feet just swelled up because you had good news. Well, not only did he have good news, but he did what the news was exactly what Yochanan ben Zakkai had just told him. You're going to be emperor. Again, did it happen in that moment? I don't know. But it's a great story because it allows this to happen. Oh, well, first let me tell you, what does he do about the shoes? Because Vespasian said to him, "What is the remedy? What must I do to be able to put on a shoe?" Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Have someone with whom you are displeased come and pass before you. As it is written, a broken spirit dries the bones." He did this, and his shoe went on his foot. Vespasian said to him, "Since you are so wise, why didn't you come to see me until now?" And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Didn't I already tell you, Vespasian?" Right? And Vespasian said to him, "I also told you what I had to say." So, according to this conversation, Vespasian then said to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, "I will be going to Rome to accept my new position, and I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging the city and waging war against it. But before I leave, Ask something of me that I can give you. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said, give me Yavne and its sages and do not destroy it. And spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel, right, the descendant of Hillel, and do not kill them as if they were rebels. And lastly, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok. Rav Yosef read the following verse about him, and some say it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I am the Lord who turns the wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish, as he should have said to him, leave the Jews alone this time. And so the rabbis have a problem that even though Yochanan ben Zakkai asked for the survival of the rabbis, he should have said to him, get out of Jerusalem, stop the siege, end this war. He didn't say that. He asked for basic things. Now you can make the argument, here it is. Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan make this request? He maintained that Vespasian might not do that much for him, and there would not even be a small amount of salvation. Therefore, he made a modest request in the hope that he would receive at least that much. So he didn't ask for something not likely to happen. He asked for little things for him, but of course for Jewish history, it was a big thing because it allowed rabbinic Judaism to be saved. Yavne became the place where these rabbis fled to after the war, established their academy there at Yavne, which is near Tel Aviv on the coast, and eventually they moved up to the north to Tiberias. So the request to spare Jerusalem doesn't happen, but the request to save some of the people of Jerusalem is there. And so the Gemara asks, what was he requesting when he asked for doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok? How did they heal them? Well, the first day they gave him water to drink that contained bran. The next day they gave him water containing flour mixed with bran. And the following day they gave him water containing flour. In this way, they slowly restored his ability to eat, allowing his stomach to broaden little by little. So you see what they did. Rabbi Tzadok had been starved to death by the siege, couldn't eat. And so what you just read is how they would restore somebody who hadn't eaten for a long time. And that's exactly what you have to do. You cannot give somebody who hasn't eaten for months food, solid food. They'll die. Can't process it. It makes them even worse. So they started giving them water, and water with a little bit of glucose in it, a little bit of nourishment in it, like barley water, and then a little bit more. And he gave it to them in a liquid form. So not even a solid form. They knew that back then. So this is how they were able to maybe at least save Rabbi Tzadok. But that's not the end yet. But I want to show you something real quick. There's another version of this story. And you know who tells us the version of the story? Josephus. Because Josephus, according to tradition, was leading the rebels in the north. And Vespasian came out in that battle. And he comes out to him and says, you are to be Caesar, O Vespasian, and emperor. You and this your son. Bind me now still more securely and keep me for yourself. For thou, O Caesar, are not only Lord over me, but over the land and the sea and all the human race. And certainly I deserve to be punished by closer custody than now, if I fabricate anything concerning God. And when he said this, Vespasian at the time did not believe him, supposing that Josephus came up with this cunning trick to save himself. But after a little while, he came to have faith in this. And God was already raising up in his thoughts of obtaining the empire and by other signs foreshadowing his advancement. So Josephus says to him the same thing. You're going to be the emperor. Well, you know, there's people who like to hear good things about themselves. You're going to be president. They love hearing that. People love hearing that. Now, what's interesting is it says actually in the Roman histories, there's Roman historian Suetonius in Judea, Vespasian consulted the oracle of God at Carmel, which is up near Haifa, and was given a promise that he would never be disappointed in what he planned or desired, however lofty his ambitions. And also, a distinguished prisoner of Vespasian's, Josephus by name, insisted that he would soon be released by the very man who had now put him in fetters, and that he would be emperor. Reports of further omens came from Rome. So you can see that Vespasian's path to being the Caesar went through Israel. And that's according to Josephus, that's according to the Romans, and that's according to the Talmud. They're all in agreement. How it happened exactly, it might be a little different. The rabbis have another rabbi telling him he's going to be the Caesar. Any questions? Any comments? So now Israel. Uh-huh. Yeah. So he basically says there, take me back to Rome as your prisoner, which is what happens. And by the way, it's an interesting history because when Josephus recounts his own history, which he did in his autobiography, which by the way has some inconsistencies in it from his own work, right? So he writes things in his autobiography, which is different than what he says in the Battle of the Jews, which is his account of the war. The Battle of the Jews is the account that has the story of Masada and it actually ends with the story of Masada. That's his way of bringing the story to conclusion. And now we have archaeological evidence that happened. When we read it in Josephus, when we first started reading Josephus, which for Jews really didn't happen until about 150 years ago, until the 1800s, when we started reading it, we thought a lot of his stories were BS, because some of them are. I mean, some of them are just couldn't have happened. But then we started seeing the archaeological evidence as we started digging up Israel during that early 1900s when the British were doing it, and then later on while Israelis were doing it. And then when we discovered Masada, oh, you mean these stories and some of the ones we thought were really outlandish really happened. So, yeah, it still doesn't mean everything he said happened, but it turns out some of it did. And according to what we know, again, according to the Romans, according to Josephus, according to the Talmud, and remember, Josephus is writing in Rome. And did he go back with Vespasian right away? If he did, he's not there during the rest of the war because Vespasian went back to Rome. The Talmud tells us that. The Romans tell us that. Josephus tells us that. If he went back to Rome with him, he's not there for the rest of the war. Okay? Which means that he wasn't there when Masada happened. He's not even in the country, which means he's hearing it months after it happened. Let me just make it clear. It's second, third, fourth hand for him if he's back in Rome when he hears the story of Masada. So not only is he not in the country, he hears about it months after it happened. Again, months isn't years, but it would have taken at least months for him to get the story. If we didn't have that story at all, wouldn't know about it. And let me tell you something. Josephus wrote about other battles, other mass suicides. He wrote about one that happened in the north, in the Galilee, where according to him, 5,000 Jews committed suicide rather than literally jumped off the walls of the city into a gorge rather than become slaves. So look, if 960 people committed suicide, which is what we believe really happened at Masada, then we can't discount that there were 5,000 Jews that committed suicide up in the north. But we don't know for sure, and we also know that there were probably other places where that happened, And he didn't write about it. He didn't know about it. Wasn't there. Maybe it was important for him. Maybe he just said, I have enough stories like that. I don't need to write about every story. No, but it was, if he was with Vespasian, it's right now. Because Vespasian goes back, he's made emperor, and he sends his son Titus in his place, which is why the arch in Rome is called the Arch of Titus. The arch that shows the temple treasures being led into Rome, including the menorah. The last time we see the menorah is on the Arch of Titus. I'll show it to you in a second. Is on the Arch of Titus, right next to the Colosseum. So Titus is left in charge. That's Vespasian's son. He's a nepo baby. Yeah, in the worst way. Everybody with us? Yes? 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 People at home?
Yes.
We're here. Okay. So let's read about Titus now. And he shall say, where is their God, their rock in whom they trusted? The line from Deuteronomy. This is the wicked Titus, who insulted and blasphemed God on high. So whereas Vespasian seems to be doing his job as a general, Titus is doing some stuff that isn't just for the sake of war, as we're about to see. What did he do? Herod is dead. Yeah, Herod's been dead for about 40 years by this point, but his grandsons are in charge. By this point, it's his grandson, Agrippa II. What did Titus do to blaspheme? When he conquered the temple, this is what the Talmud says, folks. He took a prostitute with his hand and entered the Holy of Holies with her. He then spread out a Torah scroll underneath them and had sex with her. On top of the Torah in the Holy of Holies. Afterward, he took a sword and cut into the curtain separating the sanctuary, the parochet, the separation between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the inner sanctuary. And a miracle was performed and blood spurted forth. Seeing the blood, by the way, there's a version of this in the Christian Bible, right? That when Jesus is crucified, that the temple parochet gets cut, gets ripped in sympathy with that. So interestingly, there's a Christian version of this to some extent. Seeing the blood, he mistakenly thought he had killed God. Titus saw blood issuing forth from the curtain, and he took it as a sign he had succeeded in killing God. As it is stated, your enemies roar in the midst of your meeting place, and they have set up their signs, their own signs for your sign. That's from Psalms, so that he fulfilled this kind of prophecy within Psalms. Now, again, it's not a prophecy in Psalms, but it's a line in Psalms that they say applies to what Titus did. That's a pretty horrific story. If any piece of that is based on truth, and the rabbis are like, I mean, they know something bad happened. If this isn't what really happened, this is pretty bad. And it was like this or something similar to this that happened when the Romans destroyed it. Now, again, they destroy it. So regardless of what horrible act he committed on the Holy of Holies, he's now going to destroy it, which, you know. Abba Hanan says, the verse states, who is strong like you, O Lord? That's a line from Psalms. Who is strong and indolent like you, as you hear the abuse and the blasphemy of that wicked man and remain silent? So who is like you, right? Like mi chamocha, right? Mi chamocha. Who is like you, God? Who can stand this abuse and blasphemy of that wicked man and remained silent. Similarly, the school of Rabbi Yishmael said, but that's actually the line from Psalms is Micha Mocha Hasinya, which is who is strong like you, God. But Rabbi Yishmael taught in that the verse is actually the line Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai, the one from Exodus, right? The Shirat Hayam. Who is like you among the gods? But don't say like the gods, Elim. Say who is like you among the mute? Who is like you, Ilmim? For you conduct yourself like a mute and remain silent in the face of your blasphemers. How could you let this happen, God? The rabbis just asked the question. God, you didn't say anything. While this blasphemy was taking place, you allowed it to happen in your place. How can you let this happen? How can you let this man get away with it? How is there not lightning coming out and striking him as he's doing this?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
don't you think there were guards or defenders?
What do you mean?
Well,
What do you mean, defenders?
of the Holy of Holies.
Oh, they're dead.
Oh,
This is when the Romans killed everybody, right? Everyone's dead. There's flowing blood everywhere in Jerusalem. There's only Roman soldiers now standing here at this point. The issue is God hasn't done anything. God hasn't struck all these people down. Okay? I mean, it's a fair question. Where's God when horrible things happen? Where's God when Auschwitz happened? Why is God allowing any of this carnage to happen? And now it's happening in the Holy of Holies. It's happening in God's house. How's God letting this happen? That's not the end of it. What else did Titus do? He took the curtain and formed it like a large basket. And he brought all the sacred vessels of the temple and placed them in it. And he put them on a ship to go and be praised in his city, that he had conquered Jerusalem, as it is stated. And so I saw the wicked buried and came to their rest, but those that had done right were gone from the holy place and were forgotten in the city. This is also vanity. This is a line from Ecclesiastes, which we're going to read soon. Do not read the word as buried, kevurim, rather as collected, kevutzim. Do not read the word as and were forgotten, vayishtachehu, but rather read it as and they were praised, yishtabehu. According to this interpretation, the verse speaks of those who will gather and collect its items from the holy place, the temple, and be praised in their city about what they had done. There are those who say that this verse is also to be read as written, as it is referring to items that were actually buried. This is because even items that had been buried were revealed to them. That is, Titus and his soldiers, they found all the sacred vessels, which is interesting because it tells us what we also have been told, which is that by the time the Romans destroyed the temple, the Jews had already taken out a lot of the treasures that were there. But according to this, the Romans found those too. Now, did they torture people and find out where the stuff was buried? Well, there is a map. There is a map of these buried treasures. Right? It's called the Copper Scroll. It's one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The problem is we don't really know if we don't know how to find those things. And we don't know if they were already found. According to the Talmud, they were already found. The Romans got them. Well, no, we've been able to use X-rays to, yeah. So we can translate it, we can read it. We just don't know how to read it. We don't really understand it because it's not a map of locations, right? It's not an X marks the spot map. It's a written or a written from a verbal description, somebody copying down where these things are. Um, um, you know what, before I get to the end part of this, let me just show you something real quick. Bear with me one quick second. Here you go. Yeah. We have visual evidence that what the Talmud just told us actually happened. Because this is the Arch of Titus in Rome. And on the Arch of Titus, you can actually see the menorah. This is the Romans did this. You can still see this. This is right outside. This is right outside the Colosseum in Rome right now. Now, according to tradition, Jews are never supposed to walk under the Arch of Titus. We're not supposed to walk underneath it because it's a symbol of our defeat. So you can see the Romans would build these arches whenever they had a tremendous victory. And this is the stuff coming out of our temple. These are the treasures. So this is a version of the story the Romans have told. And this is the version of this that the rabbis told. So when I tell you that there's two sides of this story and they definitely can line up, I just showed it to you. But here's the part. Here's the part that we're going to get to, which is, how do I say this? Well, let's read it and then we'll talk about it. So Titus goes back home after the destruction of the temple. It is further related about Titus that he was once traveling at sea and a wave rose up against him and threatened to drown him. And Titus said, "It seems to me that their God, the God of Israel, has power only in water." And Pharaoh rose up against them and he drowned them in water. Sisera, too, rose up against them and he drowned them in water, too. Here, too, he has risen up against me to drown me in water. So God drowns people. So I'm in the water. God's mad at me and he's going to drown me. But God can only hit people in the water. Because he says, if he's really mighty, let him go up on dry land and wage war against me. A divine voice issued forth and said to him, "Wicked one, son of a wicked one, grandson of Esau the wicked, for you are among his descendants and act just like him. I have a lowly creature in my world, and it is called a gnat." So Titus challenges God and says, "You're going to wash me out like you did the other guys?" And God accepts the challenge. God says, "Okay, you don't want to be washed away. I have a gnat." Gemara interjects, "Why is it called a lowly creature? It is called this because it has an entrance for taking in food, but it does not have an exit for excretion." That's not exactly true, but it's a very small bug, right? I'm talking about a lowly creature. So here's the point. The Gemara resumes the story about Titus, and the divine voice continued and says to Titus, that means God tells Titus, "Go up on dry land and make war with it." He went up on dry land, and a gnat came and entered his nostril and picked at his brain for 7 years. Titus suffered greatly from this until one day he passed by the gate of a blacksmith's shop, and the gnat heard the sound of a hammer and was silent and still. Titus said, "I see that there is a remedy for my pain." Every day they would bring a blacksmith who hammered before him. He would give him 4 dinars as payment to a Gentile blacksmith. And to a Jew, he would simply say, "It is enough for you to see that your enemy is in so much pain." So if the blacksmith was pagan, you had to pay him. If the blacksmith was Jewish, he said, "What do you want payment for? You're watching me get in pain. You should be happy." I wouldn't pay him. That's an interesting story because it says that there was enough Jewish blacksmiths that this would actually happen. In case you didn't think there were a lot of Jewish blacksmiths, at least during the Roman era there were. So the Jewish blacksmiths didn't get paid. I don't know if that's meant to be humorous, but it is humorous. And I think there is kind of an underlying kind of humor there. He did this for 30 days and it was effective until then. From that point on, since the gnat became accustomed to the hammering, it became accustomed to it. And once again, it began to pick away at Titus's brain. So for a while, the gnat doesn't like the sound of the hammering, but eventually the gnat gets used to it and just keeps eating away at his brain. JFK's brainworm, yeah. It is that is Mike. That was Mike, by the way, who found a modern parallel. It is taught in a Baraita. The Rabbi Pinchas ben Arova said, I was at that time among the noblemen of Rome, and when Titus died, they split open his head and found that a gnat had grown to the size of a sparrow, weighing 2 sella. And it was taught in another Baraita that it was like a 1-year-old pigeon weighing 2 litra. Whatever it was huge by the time he died, that had eaten up his brain. Now, that's a horrible way to die. And so the rabbis want you to know that this horrible guy who did a horrible thing, right, did a horrible thing, winds up having a horrible, horrible death. Now, of course, you're going to ask me the question. Somebody's going to ask me the question. Please, will somebody ask me the question? Somebody? Somebody ask me the question. No, come on. What's the question? How did he really die? Does anybody want to know how Titus really died? Because it just said that a gnat ate his brain.
I do.
It's a wonderful story. However, he does become Roman emperor after his father dies. His father dies about 9 years after he becomes emperor in 70, right? So we do know Titus succeeded his father as a military commander in Judea. That's true. The campaign came to a brief halt, Nero, right? So the Talmud even said that the war started during Nero's time, the year of the 4 emperors. And then Vespasian is the guy who did it. And then, of course, it says the Arch of Titus commemorates his victory, and it still stands to this day. But wait a second. He died in 81. He was emperor for 2 years. And you can see how old he was. He was, right? He was 42 when he died. It's not a long time. Guy did not live a very, very long time. So he is, well, let's just show you what we're told. So his father dies. Vespasian died of an infection in 79 and was succeeded by his son. He was the first Roman emperor to come to the throne after his own biological father. Because remember, all the other guys were like nephews. Augustus Caesar wasn't Julius's son, right? He was his like great nephew. This was the first time that in the Roman history where the guy actually has his son carry on. It didn't happen a lot. It hadn't happened at all yet. It was the first one. But it didn't work out very well. So you can see the Romans kind of protected themselves against people being a real Nepo baby, but he was. So let's just look at
I thought the Romans elected their leader.
their emperors. Sometimes they did, not during this period. During this period, the Senate didn't have a lot of control over it because these emperors were completely insane. I mean, some of them were. I mean, Caligula, Nero, these people were not competent emperors. And so they were generally, they were coups, right? And so it says right here, they made a temple to him and his father. It says, so they were having games to dedicate this, this wonderful, there's the Colosseum, right? This is one of the things that was done by this guy to commemorate the Jewish wars, right? I've told people this before, you don't believe me. The Colosseum was built because of us to commemorate our defeat, to use better example. They took the money that they looted from Israel and built the Colosseum, which ironically is one of the few buildings that has remained intact in Rome from the Roman period that you can still walk through. Interestingly, one of the others is Hadrian's tomb. So, yeah, it's weird that that money that was taken from the temple was used to build this. And the slaves that were used to build this were us, our ancestors. So he builds all this stuff. And it says, at the closing of the games, Titus officially dedicated the amphitheater and the baths in what was his final recorded act as emperor. He set out for the Sabine territories, but fell ill at the first posting station, where he died of a fever, reportedly in the same farmhouse as his father. Allegedly, the last words he uttered before passing away were, "I have made but one mistake." He was then succeeded by his brother Domitian, whose first act as emperor was to deify his brother. What a wonderful thing. Of course, it's going to say something right here about, yeah, right here. Babylonian Talmud attributes Titus' death to an insect that flew into his nose. Yeah. So, well, I don't want to get to the next part because we're going to read it. Yeah, whatever the case is, he doesn't live for a very long time. He has a very, very sad end, regardless. And so we would say that's what you get for challenging God, for blaspheming. And it's one thing to burn down the temple. It's another thing to do what you did, Vespasian and Titus. Bias said, we have a tradition that its mouth was made of copper and its claws were fashioned of iron. They're talking about the gnat in his head. When Titus was dying, he said to his attendants, "Burn that man," meaning me, "burn me, and scatter my ashes across the seven seas, so that the God of the Jews should not find me and stand me for judgment." The Talmud says he knew he was going to be punished in the afterlife. I don't want to be punished by God. What a wild story. But that's not the end. Because guess what? He is punished in the afterlife according to this story. And this is what we're going to finish with today. I told you this was a wild story. So this story began with the destruction of Jerusalem and ends with the destruction and punishment of Titus, the guy who destroys Jerusalem. The Gemara relates, and by the way, we're going to read something that's an anti-Christian polemic here. I'm going to show you one of the few lines in the Talmud that definitely makes fun of Christians or specifically Jesus. Watch this. The Gemara relates, Onkelos bar Kalonikos, the son of Titus's sister, meaning his nephew, Onkelos, is a Roman. He wanted to convert to Judaism. There were Romans converting to Judaism at this point. We know that. According to this, Titus's own nephew. Again, we don't know this for a fact from the other side, but there were Romans who did, and the Romans wrote about it. And of course, then there will be Romans who convert to Christianity. And it says he went and raised Titus from the grave through necromancy. So he raises his uncle and says to his spirit, "Who is most important in that world where you are now?" And Titus said to him, "The Jewish people." So in heaven, they're the most important. Onkelos said to him, "Should I then attach myself to them here in this world?" And Titus said to him, "Their commandments are numerous, and you will not be able to fulfill them. It is best as you do as follows. Go out and battle against them in that world, and you will become the chief. As it is written, her adversaries have become the chief." Well, that's from Lamentations, by the way, which we're going to read next week on Tuesday. So it's better for you to fight them than to be them, because it's really hard to be them. Anyone who distresses Israel will become the chief. Onkelos said to him, "What is the punishment of you? What's your punishment?" Right? And Titus said to him, that which he decreed against himself as he undergoes the following. Every day his ashes are gathered, they judge him, and they burn him, and they scatter him over the seven seas. So what's his punishment? Exactly what he said he was going to do to try to get out of punishment. Every day he's burned and scattered. Wow. That's not the end of the story. So Titus says, it's better for you to fight them. And he's like, oh, wait, what happened to you? What happened to you? Right? Yeah, it's true. It's hard to be Jewish. Onkelos then raised Balaam, right? The guy, the prophet who came against us in the book of Numbers, right? With Moses, the guy who ends up saying Ma tovu, but first he curses us, right? Or tries to curse us. He can't. So he raises up Balaam, a foreign prophet who tried to curse us. And then, of course, he then does work with the Moabites against us. And then he's killed in battle. And so he ends up dying. And so he's a bad wizard. He uses his powers for evil. Okay? But Onkelos raises him up. And he says, who's the most important in the world where you are now? In the next world, right? Balaam said to him, the Jewish people. Onkelos asked him, should I then attach myself to them here? And Balaam said to him, you shall not seek their peace or their welfare all their days. That's from Deuteronomy. Onkelos said to him, what is the punishment? What's your punishment, Balaam? In the next world, he said to him, I am cooked in boiling semen, as he caused Israel to engage in licentious behavior with the daughters of Moab. So he's the one who tells the Moabites to lure the Israelites into sexual orgy to move away from God, right? And as they're moving through the desert, the wilderness. So his punishment is being in semen because of that boiling. That's his hell, if you will. Weird, right? Interesting. There's
Weird.
always what?
Weird.
Oh, it's going to get weirder. Well, maybe not weirder, but there's always three, right? It's the rule of three from Star Trek. The rule of three. Onkelos then raised Jesus the Nazarene. You never see him in the Talmud, but here he made a little appearance. It is not good appearance. He raises Jesus from the grave through necromancy, and Onkelos said to him, what is the most important people in the world? Who is the most important in the world you are now? And Jesus said to him, the Jewish people. And Onkelos said to him, should I then attach myself to them in this world? And Jesus said to him, their welfare you shall seek, their misfortune you shall not seek. For anyone who touches them is regarded as if he were touching the apple of his eye. That's from Zechariah. Well, that seems like a good thing, right? You should attach yourself to them, right? You should seek their welfare. And their misfortune you shall not seek. So don't go against them. So that's a little different. But Onkelos said to him, what is the punishment that you have, right? Jesus said to him, I'm punished by being in boiling excrement. As the master said, anyone who mocks the words of the sages will be sentenced to boiling excrement. And this was his sin. He mocked the words of the sages. The Gemara comments, come and see the difference between the sinners of Israel and the prophets of the nations of the world. As Balaam, who was a prophet, wished Israel harm, whereas Jesus the Nazarene, who was a Jewish sinner, sought their well-being. That's where we're going to finish today. So the Talmud says that Jesus is a Jewish person, but he's a sinner because he mocked the teachings of the Talmud, of the rabbis, right? He said that they were not doing the right thing, or he mocked them and saying that they're bad people. So the Talmud is willing to accept, number one, that Jesus was Jewish, but they also accept, number two, that he did stuff that was bad for Judaism. But he doesn't give bad words to Onkelos. He tells Onkelos the truth. And so they say, look at these other people who are not Jewish. Look what they're still doing. They're still lying, or they're still bad-mouthing Israel, even in the next world. And they're being punished. Now, Jesus is even being punished. Now, I don't know if his punishment is better or worse than Balaam's, but he's still not as bad as these guys. So if they imagine that Jesus is being punished in the next world, at least he's not being punished, and at least he hasn't forgotten who he really is. It's a very weird story. I mean, the whole story is weird. And of course, Onkelos does convert to Judaism to some extent based on Jesus's recommendation, if you will. And interestingly, there's a Christian version of this story too, where essentially a Roman comes and, kind of wants to know what happens in the next world. And essentially, again, there's a version of a Christian onkelos, if you will, and um, similar kinds of story. And this guy onkelos ends up, according to the Talmud, and again, by the way, according to Christian sources, he converts to Judaism and he wrote a translation of the Torah called the Targum Onkelos. And it becomes one of the very important translations of the Bible that we have. And in some cases, it's used as a critical version to understand what's a good copy of the Bible. So this guy, who's one of the leading Christian scholars of the time, uses Onkelos's translation to make up what he calls the hexapla, which is a multiple translation. It's like a multiple. See if there's a picture of the hexapla. It's a multiple translation of the Bible in Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and let's see if there's a picture of it. He's a very important early Christian writer. Anyways, so Onkelos becomes a historical figure who's important. So yeah, we covered a lot of ground today, and maybe we should have even done this in two different pieces, but rather than spend a lot of time again as we wrap up thinking about the significance of the last story of what really happens to people in the next world with their punishments, understand that the Jewish concept of what happens to Titus is that he doesn't live a long time because he's punished for what he did to Jerusalem. Yeah. Yes. That yes. So what Mike just said there, according to Josephus, Titus's woman, if you will, is a Jewish princess, part of Herod's family. Now, wait a second. I started watching this horrible Roman series was on, and it was really bad. And it was just on, and it was about this period. It's called, I can't remember right now. It was just on, it was on Amazon. I think it was on Amazon. And it's about gladiators, and it's not good. And I think I'm not, but I'm just saying, no, but part of the story is that it has a Jewish part, one of Herod's family members. Wait a second, maybe it's not on Prime. It's on Paramount. I don't know. Hold it a second. It's called Those About to Die. And I think the show already died. It's called For Those About to Die. It's on Peacock. Peacock. And Anthony Hopkins is in it. Yeah, he does things sometimes that don't really make sense for money, I think. And he's so well respected that people are going to watch it. Just this is the show. Yeah, in it, Anthony Hopkins plays Vespasian. So it's about this period, and it's about these guys. Yeah, I tried to watch it, and it was really not good. Yeah, it's Roland Emmerich did it actually. I mean, it's got big people behind it. So Vespasian, along with his sons Titus and Domitianus or Domitian. So this dude plays Titus. This guy plays Titus. And in the series, it has him with that woman, with Agrippina. Is that her name? Agrippina? I can't remember. Hold on. I think it was no, Berenice. Berenice. Yeah, so she plays Berenice, who is part of the family, and Agrippa's daughter, Herod Agrippa's daughter. And according to tradition, she goes back to Rome, and she is, yeah, and she becomes, so she's in this. I didn't watch it very much. I'm telling you, I couldn't really get past the first episode, but she becomes has an affair with Titus, who is 11 years younger than her. Mike shaking his head in disbelief. Anyways, uh, yeah, I mean, look, the Herodians took the Flavian side, right? The Berenice would not have been opposed to sleeping with Titus because her family supported Vespasian. So it's not like they were on other sides of the they supported the Romans. So there you go. So yes, I can't recommend it. I couldn't even like I said, I don't even think I could get through the first episode of it. But it was interesting because had a great cast, and this guy was in it too. He's been in a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, I saw him in Game of Thrones. He's a crazy guy in that. He's Ramsay Bolton.
Yeah, he's the crazy guy. He's a good actor.
Yeah, he's good. He plays the head of the. He plays this really corrupt, really scary guy who's running he runs the gaming. He's the sports book guy who runs the gaming casino for the sports book casino for the Romans, and so he's running things in the background. So it's yeah, it's pretty wild. So yeah, it's got some, look, I thought it would be like Gladiator or something like that, but it's not. It's got big people in it. I mean, Rupert Penn. I mean, these guys are big guys, but and it's not good. So, anyways, I can't recommend it, but at least it has these characters in it, and it's kind of like, would see. And they spent, wow, look at that, they spent $140 million on it, and none of you had heard of it. That's what's so amazing. None of you had heard about it. So I can't, like I said, I can't recommend it, but how many? Yeah, I think it's announced that Peacock issues. Yeah, it doesn't really say. It says 48%. That's not good. Yeah, it says mixed or average. What? Josephus wrote in Greek. So, yes, he did not write in Latin. He wrote in Greek, which was the language of the Romans in Israel. On the eastern part of their empire, the Romans wrote and wrote their letters and wrote their signs, and they wrote a lot of their stuff, their messages in Greek. Because that whole eastern part of the Roman Empire was Greco-Roman Empire was still very Greek influenced from the Seleucid dynasty, the Ptolemaics, right? All those people that took over from Alexander the Great, they all spoke Greek. So that was the language of, culture. So that's what Josephus wrote in, and that's what he learned. As a Jew, the Jews would speak probably, depending on where you were in the class of people, how much need you had to speak Greek. Probably not a lot of Jews necessarily were fluent in Greek, but they were fluent in Aramaic during that time. They probably had a pretty good ability to read Hebrew because it's the same letters and a lot of the same vocabulary, and they could understand it. And then probably the ones who had a higher level of education and more trade and more work with the Romans and with other peoples from other countries probably spoke Greek. So a lot of Jews probably spoke three languages. And then there were probably some who were really educated who spent time in Rome who spoke Latin. But they definitely would have spoken three languages, at least passing a little Greek they would have had to know if they had any kind of store or shop where the Roman soldiers would pass through because they would need to speak Greek probably. The Roman soldiers, again, some of them were from Germany, some of them were from Britain, from Gaul, from different parts of the empire. They would have had to speak other languages too. Yeah. Well, no, because a lot of the Romans learned Greek. Almost all the senators and all those people, they would have known Greek. But Josephus definitely knew Latin. By the time he was writing in Rome, I'm sure he spoke Latin. I'm sure he had picked up enough Latin that he probably could have written in Latin, but he didn't feel comfortable writing in Latin, and that was not his. He did not have to write in Latin. I mean, he probably, by the way, dictated his stuff to a Greek scribe anyways. He probably didn't write it with his own hand. He probably dictated his works to a Greek scribe who knew Greek better than he did. My guess is, I mean, he probably had. There's some differences in some of his writing, so we assume that he might have had different scribes, as he was writing, and they would have written in slightly different vocabulary, certain word choices. But like I said, I'm not a Josephine scholar, but I read him more than most people do, and I'll tell you that there are conflicting things, and some people say it's because he had somewhat different editors or writers, and he contradicts himself. So, what can I say? If by the time he got to be 70, 75, he might have forgotten certain things, and I don't know why he didn't check, but he didn't check. Josephus died in, I want to say 94. Let me just see. I think he died 19 Josephus no, he died in 100. So about 100. So he lived about 70 years, 63 years. So somebody else died in 94. He lived to see he lived to see up to some of the he lived through the Vespasian emperors. So I think I don't know if they know exactly when he died, but his last writings I think might have been from about these are all his writings. His autobiography. Yeah. So, yeah, you can see these are his writings that he wrote. I do. I have his books. I have some books of his if anybody wants to read him. Anyways, folks, have a great Passover. I hope you were, if not, this will not give you nightmares tonight about bugs crawling up your nostrils and eating your brain. But hopefully you'll have a good Passover, everybody. And we will be streaming Passover. So if you want to join us for our online Pesach version of Seder, we'll be on stream too. So take care, everybody. Chag Sameach, happy Passover, and stay well. Look forward to seeing you all soon. We'll be here next week, next Wednesday. It will be during Passover. Take care, everybody.
Chag
Bye.
Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Bye-bye.